The patrol car slowed as it approached a quiet intersection near the edge of the city. Traffic was light. The evening was calm. The officer inside the vehicle followed routine procedure, scanning license plates as part of a standard patrol shift. When one plate returned a flag for verification, he activated the lights, not as a sign of urgency, but as part of normal protocol. The vehicle pulled over promptly. The officer stepped out, adjusted his uniform, and approached the driver's side with a measured pace. His posture was professional. His tone remained controlled. "Good evening, sir," he said. "May I see your license and registration?" The driver complied immediately. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure each action was visible. His demeanor was calm. There was no visible agitation, no confusion, no resistance. The documents were handed over without comment. From the outside, the interaction appeared routine, the kind of brief encounter that happens countless times every day in cities around the world. The officer reviewed the paperwork carefully, standing beside the vehicle as he checked details against the system. Nearby, a few cars passed. A pedestrian paused briefly at the corner, then continued walking. Nothing about the scene suggested conflict. There were no raised voices, no gestures of frustration, no visible tension. The driver remained seated, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, eyes forward. He did not attempt to explain, justify, or question the stop. He waited. Moments like these often go unnoticed, small, ordinary exchanges that form the foundation of public trust in everyday systems. Most end quietly, without consequence, without memory. At this point, no one present could have predicted that the next few minutes would become a defining example of how decisions are judged, not by intent, but by adherence to professional standards. For now, it was simply an observation, an officer performing his duties, a driver cooperating fully, a public interaction unfolding under routine conditions. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just a moment, still unresolved, quietly setting the stage for everything that would follow. This story takes place in a fictional city within a fictional law enforcement department. It is not intended to represent any real individual, location, or actual event. The street where the vehicle was stopped reflected an ordinary urban setting. Small businesses lined the road. Street lights flickered on as daylight began to fade. The sounds of distant traffic blended with the low hum of the city, settling into evening. For the officer, this was one of many routine stops during a long shift. Training emphasized consistency, safety, and control. Each interaction was expected to follow procedure, regardless of time, place, or person. The department's internal handbook made this clear. Decisions must be based on observable factors, not assumptions. Inside the vehicle, the driver waited patiently. He did not reach for his phone. He did not attempt conversation. He remained still, understanding that calm cooperation often keeps situations simple. The officer returned to his patrol car to complete standard checks. Information was entered into the system. Time passed quietly. In professional environments, moments like these are rarely dramatic. They exist in the space between action and outcome, where judgment, training, and habit intersect. The department operated under a structured chain of responsibility. Patrol officers were trained to act independently, but within defined limits. Supervisors monitored activity remotely, reviewing data in real time when necessary. Body cameras recorded continuously. Dash cameras captured every angle. Timestamps marked each decision. These systems were not designed for punishment, but for accountability. Back at the vehicle, the officer approached again. His tone remained formal. "Please remain seated while I complete verification," he said. The driver nodded slightly. There was no visible frustration on either side, no sign of impatience. What unfolded was not a confrontation, but a pause, a waiting period shaped by policy rather than emotion. Nearby, a passerby slowed briefly, noticing the patrol lights. Another glanced from a bus stop across the street. These moments often draw attention, even when nothing unusual is happening. Yet attention alone does not define wrongdoing. The environment remained controlled. Inside the department headquarters, several blocks away, routine operations continued. Calls came in. Reports were filed. Supervisors rotated shifts. Nothing indicated that this stop would become noteworthy. And yet, Professional systems are built on review, not assumptions. Any action taken during a stop could later be examined. Was procedure followed? Was communication clear? Was conduct aligned with policy? The driver understood this. So did the officer. In fictional stories like this one, the outcome is not driven by sudden heroism or dramatic reveals. It is shaped by how systems respond to everyday decisions. At this stage, there was no conclusion. No judgment had been made. No outcome determined. Only a controlled environment, guided by rules, moving steadily toward its next step. What followed would not depend on who the driver was, but on how the process itself unfolded. After completing the initial checks, the officer remained inside the patrol vehicle for a moment, reviewing the information displayed on the screen. The system required confirmation on a few standard points, nothing unusual, but enough to warrant careful attention. Training emphasized that uncertainty should be addressed through procedure, not impulse. The officer stepped out once more and approached the vehicle with steady movements. His voice was even and controlled. "Sir," he said, "there's a brief verification step we need to complete. It may take a few minutes." The driver acknowledged the instruction with a calm nod. "I understand," he replied. "Take the time you need." There was no objection, no visible discomfort. As outlined in departmental guidelines, the officer explained the next step clearly before proceeding. Transparency was a key requirement. Every action needed a reason. Every reason needed to be communicated. For safety and documentation purposes, the officer continued, "I'm going to place temporary restraints while we complete the process." The explanation was delivered without accusation or escalation. The driver remained composed. "If that's your procedure," he said quietly, "I'll cooperate." The restraints were applied carefully and without force. The driver did not resist, raise his voice, or attempt to challenge the decision. His posture remained relaxed, his movements deliberate. This moment, often misunderstood in public perception, was framed strictly as a procedural choice within a fictional scenario. It was not presented as punishment, suspicion, or judgment, only process. Nearby, traffic continued to pass. The city did not pause. For most observers, the scene remained indistinguishable from countless other routine stops. What mattered internally, however, was documentation. Body cameras continued recording. Dash footage remained active. Timestamps captured each step. Within professional institutions, actions are rarely evaluated in isolation. Context matters. Explanation matters. Conduct matters. The officer followed protocol by notifying dispatch of the temporary restraint. This triggered an automatic log entry, a standard step that ensured supervisory visibility. Inside the system, alerts did not imply wrongdoing. They simply marked a decision point. The driver stood quietly near the vehicle, eyes forward, breathing steady. He did not ask questions. He did not attempt to assert authority or identity. Instead, he waited, trusting the process to resolve itself. In fictional narratives grounded in professionalism, tension does not arise from confrontation, but from review. The officer checked his watch. A few minutes had passed. He reviewed the guidelines again, confirming that each step had been followed in sequence. Training officers often stressed that correct procedure is not about speed, but about consistency. Across departments worldwide, accountability depends on this principle. At this stage, nothing had gone wrong. No rule had been broken, no conclusion drawn, but the moment had reached a threshold, one that would soon involve oversight beyond the individual officer. That oversight was not emotional. It was procedural, and it would determine what happened next. Within the department's operational framework, certain actions automatically triggered a secondary layer of review. This was not an indication of fault, but a safeguard designed to ensure consistency and accountability across all encounters. The moment the temporary restraint was logged, supervisory systems registered the event. Inside the department's monitoring center, screens displayed live feeds and timestamp data from patrol units across the city. Supervisors rotated attention between calls, reports, and alerts, treating each with the same measured focus. No conclusions were drawn. Only facts were observed. Body camera footage was accessed remotely, showing the interaction from start to finish. The audio confirmed calm communication on both sides. The officer's tone remained formal. The driver's responses were cooperative and measured. Nothing about the exchange suggested urgency or escalation. Still, policy required examination, not because something looked wrong, but because systems function best when decisions are reviewed consistently, not selectively. The sergeant paused the footage at key points. Was the explanation provided clearly? Was the restraint justified under guidelines? Were alternative steps available? These questions were not personal. They were procedural. Meanwhile, on the street, the officer remained composed. He stood at a respectful distance, maintaining visibility and awareness while waiting for confirmation from dispatch. The driver continued to wait calmly, posture unchanged. He did not attempt conversation. He did not express frustration. His demeanor reflected patience rather than expectation. Moments passed quietly. This stage of professional oversight is often invisible to the public. Most people assume decisions are final the moment they're made. In reality, many institutions operate under layered review, where actions are examined not to assign blame, but to improve consistency. Inside the monitoring center, the sergeant requested additional context from the system. A senior supervisor was notified, not as an escalation, but as part of routine protocol when a stop extended beyond a short duration. Again, this did not imply wrongdoing. It implied diligence. The senior supervisor joined the review, watching the footage with the same neutral attention. He noted the officer's adherence to communication standards. He also noted areas where policy language allowed discretion. Discretion, however, carries responsibility. In structured systems, discretion must always align with intent and proportionality. The supervisors exchanged brief, professional remarks, not opinions, not assumptions, but observations grounded in policy language. The goal was clarity. Back on the street, the officer received a message from dispatch requesting him to pause further action until confirmation was complete. He acknowledged immediately. "Understood," he replied. He turned toward the driver and spoke calmly. "We're just completing a routine review," he explained. "Thank you for your patience." The driver nodded. "No problem," he said quietly. The interaction remained steady, defined not by tension, but by restraint on both sides. Inside headquarters, the review reached a conclusion. Not a judgment of character, not a public statement, but an internal determination about whether the chosen procedure aligned with department expectations for similar situations. In professional environments, outcomes are rarely dramatic. They unfold through documentation, discussion, and alignment with established standards. The supervisors finalized their notes. A decision was ready to be communicated. What mattered next was not who anyone was, but how the system responded to its own rules. And that response would quietly shape the resolution to come. Once the internal review reached its preliminary conclusion, communication became the priority. In structured organizations, clarity is often the most effective form of de-escalation. Dispatch relayed a brief update to the officer on scene, instructing him to pause and await supervisory guidance. The message was concise, procedural, and free of interpretation. The officer acknowledged immediately. He approached the driver again, maintaining a respectful distance and an open posture. "Thank you for your patience," he said calmly. "We're completing a routine clarification step. This won't take much longer." The driver listened attentively. "I appreciate the update," he replied. "Take your time." There was no visible frustration in his voice, no attempt to hurry the process. In many interactions, uncertainty fuels tension. Here, transparency did the opposite. By explaining each step clearly, the atmosphere remained controlled and calm. A supervisory unit arrived shortly after, not with urgency, but with purpose. The supervisor exited the vehicle and observed the scene before engaging. This pause mattered. In professional practice, observation comes before intervention. The supervisor reviewed the situation visually, confirming what had already been documented. A calm environment, a cooperative individual, and an officer maintaining procedural conduct. He approached both parties evenly. "Good evening," he said. "I'm here to ensure everything is aligned with our internal guidelines." His tone was neutral, his language precise. To the officer, he asked a series of factual questions. What steps had been taken? What information had been received? What rationale guided each action? The officer responded clearly, referencing training and procedure rather than opinion. To the driver, the supervisor offered a brief explanation. "This review is part of our standard quality control process," he said. "It's designed to ensure consistency across all interactions." The driver acknowledged the explanation without comment. There was no sense of accusation in the exchange, no implication of fault, only process. After confirming the details, the supervisor nodded. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said to both. He then instructed the officer to remove the temporary restraints, as the clarification phase had been completed. The officer complied immediately and carefully. The restraints were removed without incident. No sudden movement followed, no emotional reaction. The driver adjusted his posture slightly and remained standing calmly beside the vehicle. The supervisor continued, "At this point, you're free to go. We appreciate your patience during the review." The driver responded with a simple nod. "Thank you for explaining everything clearly," he said. "I understand the need for process." This moment, quiet and unremarkable, marked a true resolution of the street interaction. No raised voices, no public confrontation, no spectacle. What remained was documentation. The supervisor recorded the outcome, noting the duration of the stop, the steps taken, and the de-escalation measures applied. The purpose was not to assign blame, but to close the procedural loop. Back at headquarters, these notes would become part of a broader review, one that looked at patterns, not personalities. For the officer, the encounter ended professionally. He returned to his patrol vehicle and resumed duty, following standard reporting requirements. For the driver, the experience concluded without drama. He returned to his vehicle, completed the necessary formalities, and prepared to continue on his way. Neither party lingered. In fictional narratives grounded in realism, resolution often arrives quietly, not with declarations, but with alignment. This stage was not about outcome. It was about clarity. Everyone involved understood what had happened, why it happened, and how it was resolved. And in professional systems, that understanding is the foundation upon which accountability is later built. What followed would take place away from the street, within institutional walls, where reflection, review, and corrective decisions are made without an audience. The interaction itself was over. The process, however, was still moving. After the interaction concluded on the street, the process moved to a setting where decisions are meant to be made carefully and without pressure, inside the institution itself. At headquarters, the completed reports were logged into the internal review system. Timestamps, camera footage, and supervisory notes were organized into a single case file. This was standard practice, not an exception. In professional organizations, accountability does not begin with blame. It begins with review. A small internal panel convened later that day, composed of supervisory staff responsible for training, policy alignment, and operational standards. Their role was not disciplinary by default, but evaluative. They examined the sequence step by step. The initial reason for the stop, the communication used, the decision to apply temporary restraints, the duration of the interaction, the de-escalation and resolution. Each element was reviewed independently, then as part of the whole. The panel did not speculate about intent. They did not consider reputation, status, or public perception. They focused on one question only. Did the actions taken align with departmental expectations for fairness, proportionality, and consistency? Footage was replayed in real time. The officer's tone was noted, calm and controlled. The driver's behavior was documented, cooperative and respectful. No escalation had occurred. No resistance was present. That context mattered. At the same time, policy language was reviewed carefully. Guidelines existed to help officers make decisions under uncertainty, but they also set limits. The panel discussed whether alternative steps could have achieved the same outcome with less restriction. This discussion was not accusatory. It was instructional. In institutions committed to improvement, accountability often takes the form of correction rather than punishment. After deliberation, the panel reached a conclusion. While procedures had been followed in sequence, the decision to apply restraints in this specific scenario did not fully align with the department's proportional response standard as written. This did not imply misconduct. It did not suggest malice. It indicated a need for adjustment. The officer was notified privately and respectfully. A supervisor met with him to explain the findings, referencing specific policy language and training materials. "This is about consistency," the supervisor said. "We're aligning practice with expectation." The response was measured. Corrective action was issued in accordance with internal policy, administrative in nature, focused on retraining and review rather than public discipline. No press statement was made, no announcement issued, because accountability handled correctly does not require an audience. For the officer, this became a learning moment, a reminder that discretion must always be balanced against impact. For the institution, it was confirmation that the review system functioned as intended. Meanwhile, the driver was formally notified that the stop had been reviewed and resolved internally. The communication was brief, professional, and transparent. It confirmed that the interaction had been evaluated and that appropriate steps had been taken. No apology was dramatized. No explanation overextended. Just closure. In fictional stories grounded in professionalism, resolution does not rely on exposure or humiliation. It relies on systems working quietly, consistently, and fairly. By the end of the process, no one was elevated. No one was publicly diminished. What remained was trust and procedure. The department returned to routine operations. The officer continued service with updated guidance. The case file was archived for training reference. And the lesson, though unspoken, was clear. Institutions earn credibility not by claiming fairness, but by applying it evenly, even when no one is watching. This fictional story ends without a headline moment, without applause, and without confrontation. And that is intentional. In real life, meaningful outcomes are rarely dramatic. They emerge quietly, through systems that work as designed and people who choose professionalism over impulse. What unfolded in this story was not about power, recognition, or status. It was about everyday decisions, the kind made thousands of times a day in workplaces, institutions, and public spaces around the world. An officer followed training. A supervisor followed review protocols. A system followed its own rules. And when alignment was needed, it happened without noise. That is how trust is built. Fairness is not measured by intent alone, but by consistency. Professionalism is not proven in easy moments, but in routine ones. In this fictional scenario, no one raised their voice. No one demanded special treatment. No one relied on identity to influence outcome. Instead, clarity guided behavior. The driver remained calm, not because he expected a particular result, but because he trusted the process to resolve itself correctly. The officer accepted review, not as a threat, but as part of professional responsibility. And the institution responded not with punishment for appearance's sake, but with structured accountability. That balance matters. When systems correct quietly, they become stronger. When people listen instead of react, environments stay safe. This story is a reminder that respect does not begin when a situation escalates. It begins before anything goes wrong. It begins with tone, with explanation, with patience. It reminds us that fairness is not selective. It does not change based on who is involved, how familiar they seem, or how visible a situation becomes. True professionalism looks the same every time. In workplaces, on the street, in leadership roles, character is revealed not by authority, but by conduct. And accountability, when done right, does not need to embarrass to be effective. This channel shares fictional stories like this not to assign blame, but to reflect on values that apply everywhere. Respect, consistency, and responsibility. If this story resonated with you, it's likely because you've seen moments like this in real life. Moments where calm choices prevented unnecessary conflict. Those moments matter